Okay, welcome back to the second half of the session. And our next speaker is Širović. Anyway, I pronounced my own name wrong, so don't worry about it. Anyway, Anna.
Good morning. Thank you all. Before I start into the whole topic of ocean ambient noise and long-term trends, what I first want to do is tell you a little story and try to explain why, while a lot of people, some people have referred to Walter as the Einstein of the oceans, where in my mind he is more linked to Mozart. So when I was a first-year graduate student here at Scripps in 2000, Walter and Judy were so kind to invite all of the first-year students. Every month they would invite 2 students that were in PO or AOS or climate to their house for dinner. And we were all anxiously anticipating our invitation. So when my time came, I went with my fellow PO student, and we had a lovely evening of conversations that ranged from science, and as a budding marine and bioacoustician, I was really excited and interested to hear about ATOC and trials and tribulations that Chris was talking about. But then also we talked about random other things. And Walter was from Austria. He's traveled a lot around Europe. And I grew up in Croatia or Yugoslavia. And we were talking about that part of the world and how they spend all this time in Trieste and in Italy. And so I was sharing with them how when I was a kid in the 1980s, the thing to do was to do day trips to Austria. We'd go to Graz, and you do all this shopping for you know, good stuff like good toilet paper and really good detergent, all these things that were not quite as good as the stuff we can buy in Zagreb. So that was our quarterly family trip. It was a day trip to Graz. And the thing that I was mostly excited about was the chocolate I could buy there, because it was much better than the chocolate I could buy back home. So I would come back with all these treats that I thought were awesome, like, you know, little Kinder eggs with the surprise egg inside, and Milka chocolates and all those kinds of things. And so as we're talking about all this, at one point, Judy just kind of disappears and goes away, and she comes back, and when she comes back, she's holding in her hands Mozart balls. So for those of you who are not familiar with them, they are these delicious chocolate-covered marzipan balls, and they're made in Salzburg in Austria. And I'm sure that both Walter and Judy could see how excited I was to see this, because this was the extra special treat that I would get. And so I think it's a nice combination of all good things. So I want to thank Peter and Bruce for humoring me and allowing me to go ahead and purchase a whole bunch of these Mozart balls. And actually, it turns out 2017 US is not that much different from Yugoslavia in 1980s, because it was really hard to find these. And you'll notice that they're not actually balls, but I vouch that they're still delicious. So during lunch break, there's going to be a basket outside with these for each and every one of you. So I take them, and as you enjoy them after lunch or before lunch, I won't judge, take a moment to ponder the awesomeness of chocolate, but then also the awesomeness of sound and how much we collectively, but you know, from Mozart to Walter, have done with this sound, and how valuable and an awesome thing it is. And it's so much better when you enjoy it with chocolate. So with that, again, thank you again to Bruce and Peter for inviting me, and again for humoring my love of chocolate. So with that, I want to get now to the less important, the science part of this. And Chris did a really nice job of introducing the sound and how and why it's important to the animals that live in the ocean. And this is the part that I'm mostly interested in. So just to recap, sound is really vital for a number of biologically important functions, for invertebrates, for fish, for marine mammals. And they use it to attract mates, they use it to forage, to defend their territories, for navigation, for spawning. And so all of these are basic functions that animals need to survive and reproduce, which is what they're all trying to do. And changes in their ability to make that sound and to perceive sounds that others are making can be vital to their ability to survive. So with that then comes the relevance of noise to the environment that marine life lives in, because as sound levels around them are increasing, it becomes harder for them to accomplish these important tasks. And some of the ways that the increasing noise levels can impact marine life is through something as basic as masking. And again, Chris had a very nice schematic showing the shrink in range over which your conspecifics can hear you if you're increasing the background noise levels. And then there's also a variety of behavioral impacts that people have shown to occur over time, from displacement to changes in disruption in foraging, decrease in calling behavior. And there's also then the most severe physiological impacts from increased stress, hearing loss, or even death. And so I believe that to understand how all of this noise could impact the animals, it's important to first understand how well what ocean noise levels are and what kind of environment are the animals actually exposed out there. And the basic question then is, how well can we describe ocean noise levels? Because again, we know that it's going to be quite variable depending on where you are and the environment that's surrounding the animals. So over the last decades or so, this importance of sound has become increasingly more obvious and apparent to larger groups of people. And governments are starting to adopt noise monitoring strategies. Just last year, NOAA has adopted an ocean noise strategy, and the goal of that strategy is to address ocean noise impact on marine life. Under this strategy framework, they're providing guides to science and also to management actions that are basically then promoted through NOAA. And this includes archives of data, setting up monitoring networks, mapping, provides maps of noise. EU is even further ahead in some ways in this respect than the US is, because their Marine Strategy Framework Directive went into effect in 2008. And under that directive, the goal of it is to protect marine environment and achieve what they call good environmental status. And while it's broad and covers all kinds of things, one of the descriptors is actually ocean noise. And the goal of it is to ensure that introduced noise in the ocean does not negatively impact life. And under that directive, there's actually mandated ocean noise monitoring to all EU member states. That's very specific. They're supposed to do monitoring in third octave band at 63 and 125 hertz. And while not all states are doing this necessarily, at least there is some growing consensus. This is something important and something that we need to be doing. So what I want to use my time here to do is tell you what we know and what we've been learning and understanding about how noise has been changing and what it means kind of on this large scale. And unlike Bill's talk, I'm not going to talk about wind and waves. My focus is going to be more on human contributions to that noise, because that's where, again, we see a lot of these interactions with animals and potential impact on animals. And for the most part, it's also going to be a lot shallower than what Bill was showing you. Most of the data that I'm going to show you, they're kind of from depths from about 500 to 1,000 meters from a single recorder that have been deployed over time. So we have various time series. So let me start here in Southern California. So we're just here in San Diego, and that big red spot denotes the location of one of the SOSUS hydrophones. Again, Chris mentioned earlier. And back in the 60s, there was recordings at the location where they quantified the noise. And then Mark McDonald and colleagues in early 2000s went back and deployed a hydrophone in the exact same location, at the same depth. And what they found is shown on the right-hand side in that spectral plot. The blue line is showing you noise levels in the 60s, and the red line is the noise levels in the 2000s. And you can see that there is quite a dramatic increase. Again, this bump lower than 200 hertz is mostly dominated by shipping, other than that peak at about 20, which is actually fin whales, but I'll get to that in a second. But, so you notice that there's a substantial increase of about 3 dB per decade, largely attributed to shipping. And you may wonder, wait, shipping? But that's like way out there. And that's exactly right. It's not, we're not talking about local shipping. What I'm talking about is shipping across ocean basins. This is, the site is kind of at the Southern California borderlands, listening out into the North Pacific, hearing traffic between China and North America pretty much. So we went back in 2009, 2010, back to that site, and we're interested to see how, if what Mark McDonald has observed, if that is still the case or if the levels were changing. And so I want to walk you through kind of a year of noise at this particular site. So this is, I'm going to start with summer of 2009. And again, you notice at the frequencies lower than 200 hertz, there's this characteristic ship noise bump. So it's still pretty loud. The noise higher than 200 hertz is going to be mostly wave wind action. You see there's some variability. The July data, actually, this is just a partial data, so there's clearly a storm happening at the time. But then as we move into fall, you notice a few interesting peaks. So this, at very low frequencies, below about 30 hertz, there's this really substantial bump that gets higher and higher, and that is due to fin whales. So here I'm showing you, these are the red, this is just a little spectrogram of a fin whale song, and just for fun, let me play you what that sounds like. And again, these are very low frequency, I had to speed them up, but I only did it by a factor of 2, so that I'm not distorting the sense of how low these sounds are too much. So let's see. These guys are very loud, and they can call persistently like this, similar to blue whales, for very long time periods. So much so that, as you can see, they elevate the background noise levels by about 5 or 6 dB during the time when they're present and calling out here. If you look closely, you'll notice this smaller peak that happens also in late summer, and that is blue whales. The blue whales here off of California actually sound different than the blue whales that Chris was playing for you, and because blue whales actually have dialect. And so again, here I'm going to show you a simple sped up clip. Again, I sped this up by a factor of 2 just so that it's a little bit, so, you know, it's a little bit higher frequency, a little bit shorter than in reality, but you can still get that sense of how deep and intense those sounds are. And then there's also this other, the third bump that I want to point your eyes towards is that little blip down at about 300 hertz, and this is from humpback whale songs. And I was going to play humpbacks for you too, but one, I mean, everybody's heard humpbacks. But 2, these are actually, even though they create quite a substantial increase in energy, the recording that we have, which I'm showing you a spectrogram of down here, was pretty quiet. Any one of these individual sequences, there was just a lot of noise, and I tried cleaning it up, but it still sounded kind of messy. But even though they're not great to listen to, they're still contributing quite substantially to the overall background noise levels. Then when we move into spring, a lot of the marine mammals go away or they get quieter. You see those things disappearing, but you notice that, again, the shipping noise is still there. And then if we look at what those levels really are, kind of for comparison, because when I'm just going through it, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have a reference point. You can see that the levels in 2009 and 2010, which are shown in blue and red, are actually a little bit lower than they were in 2003 and 4. And I believe this is because of this is the period of the Great Recession, when there was a huge economic downturn and things just weren't getting shipped across the Pacific as much. But interestingly, we've repopulated that site since in 2014 and 15. And to my surprise, we were expecting that those noise levels would go back up because things are supposed to be humming again, economically speaking. And it actually looks like the data are still, the noise levels are still decreasing. So I'm trying to figure out why why that is. But there's a couple of interesting points in that 2014 and 2015 data. One is, you notice in 2015 you're actually not seeing these peaks for blue whales, and that was a really weird year. It was warm here. The water was really warm. There's all kinds of things happening out there, and animals just weren't doing what they normally do. But you notice that the 2014 peaks are quite prominent. And you can see those peaks exist also in 2010, but in 2014 they're that much more obvious above background noise because it is quieter. So the whales may be calling it kind of similar levels, but you can hear them so much better now when the noise levels have decreased. So in the deep ocean, while we know that there's this idea that the noise levels have been increasing over time, I think there's some complexity to that, and how actually, I think the interplay of how the economic development and things like shipping feed into the noise levels that we see is very interesting, and something that I think we need to work a little bit more at to understand exactly how that works. Now, if we go to shallow waters, so now we're moving from San Nicolas closer inshore, just off San Clemente Island. And again, this was a data exists there from the 50s and 60s when the Navy had hydrophones out there. And again, Mark McDonald went out and deployed a hydrophone in the same location in 2000s. And what I'm showing you on the right there side is a figure from his paper where in the blue, you can see that the dark blue is the spectral from 2005 and 6 with ships removed from the data, because that's what the available data from the Navy records were. And you can see that those levels actually haven't changed. The background levels have not changed. But when you add ships to that, there's about 5 to 10 dB increase. And at this particular site, because this is in an enclosed basin, the ships that we see there, these are local ships and kind of local traffic. We're no longer talking about this broad across Pacific shipping. So the location of where you are, even though the recorders were at similar depths, the bathymetry and kind of this physical environment around it was determining where the sounds that we're hearing. So the two bottom blue lines, these are San Clemente plots that I was just showing you from 2005. And then the red lines on top, this is the San Nicolas data in 2004, and then the lower levels in 2009. So we have local, smaller shipping, kind of the lower bound of our overall noise levels, and we have the long distance cross-Pacific shipping. And then the Santa Barbara Channel falls kind of in the middle between those two. And because this is a small enclosed basins, but there's lots of shipping activity through there. And you see that it's kind of closer to some of these really loud areas that are exposed to broad shipping. Now, moving further out into the Pacific, I've also been working with colleagues at the Pacific Fisheries Island Science Center, and they've deployed recorders out across Central and Western Pacific, and I've been able to use those data to look at noise levels on this larger scale across the basin. And so I've circled 4 locations, 3 along the Hawaiian island chain, and then 1 off of Saipan, where we've looked at data, and I'm going to show you just examples from summer of 2009 and 10. Again, this is the period of that Great Recession, to look at what the noise levels are like there. But what I want to just tell you, you can't quite see it from this figure, but a lot of these recorders are actually there on the south side of the islands. Ladd is the only one that's on the north side, and that's going to become important in a second. So here what you see now is the spectral plots for each of those locations. And overall, the levels at Ladd are a little bit higher than the others. And that's the one, again, that's listening more to that North Pacific shipping, whereas the others, what we're hearing is towards south, towards Australia and South Pacific, where the shipping is substantially less intense. And if we compare that to what we see in the Eastern Pacific, I've adjusted the scales here so they actually match. And you can see that the levels that we had in 2009 and 10 in the Central Pacific were more comparable to the levels off St. Nick in the 60s than they were in more recent times. So even in kind of broad open ocean, there's still places that are relatively quiet and are not as perturbed by the intense shipping activity. And if you still see it in your head by any chance, the shipping plot that Chris showed, it explains really nicely why this is the case, because you can see all of those shipping routes are largely across the northern hemisphere, and a lot less traffic is happening down south. And just for fun, we can add some more locations in the North Pacific. We've had recorders in the Gulf of Alaska and also off Washington State, and these cover the Washington State one is on this kind of beginning coastal area of that Great Circle route that's going to go off to China, and Gulf of Alaska side is actually north of it. And you can see in those plots that are noted in yellow for Gulf of Alaska and green for Washington State, that they match, they fall somewhere between the intensities at Santa Barbara Channel and that of St. Nicholas, because that's kind of a similar environment that they're exposed to. So next I want to jump off into the Atlantic and tell you a story of a study that we did recently at Bermuda. Now this is another one location where in the 60s the Navy had some hydrophones on the south side of Bermuda, and we were able to repopulate that location with a recorder. On the right hand side, again, I'm showing you a schematic of shipping traffic across the North Atlantic, and the green circle with a little yellow around it is the location of the recorder approximately. And you notice, since we're on the south side of Bermuda, Bermuda is shadowing a lot of the activity from the northern Atlantic. So we're mostly looking, if you will, down towards the south. So when we put that recorder in, we expected it, because everybody knows that trends in shipping noise are going up, we expected that actually long-term noise in Bermuda is also going to be much higher now than it was before. But to my surprise, so here I'm showing you the figure with kind of 4 monthly plots in different colors from 2013 and 14, and then this darker line that goes along the bottom of them is the data from the 60s. And so what you see is that the current summertime levels in Bermuda are not that much different from historic. It's a little bit higher during the winter. And overall, we estimate there's about half a dB increase per decade at the site, which is substantially less than what Mark McDonald and colleagues found in the Pacific a decade prior. So again, it was a little bit puzzling and wondering why that could be the case. And I think, again, the answer is the exposure and the fact that I think most of the traffic that we're seeing and hearing is actually coming from the Panama Canal or going to the Panama Canal. And while the number of vessels shown in black line and the number or the size of those vessels has increased dramatically over the last 50 or 60 years, the dots that are plotted there are showing the number of passages through the Panama Canal. And I've highlighted in black the data point from 1966 on the left-hand side, and then the data points from the time period when we were there, occupying that site at Bermuda. And you notice there's actually very little change in the number of ship passages, and that could be the reason why we did not record higher levels, because, again, that's kind of creating a bottleneck that's preventing increase in noise. Now, the reason why we're populating this site is because Panama Canal was slated to expand, and that's actually happened just this year. And so now we're going back there to record noise again and to see how that expansion of the canal that is now going to allow much larger ships to come through, how that is going to change or impact the noise levels. And just to demonstrate that this is really an unusual spot in the Atlantic, if you look at other places such as Cape Hatteras off the US East Coast, the noise levels there are definitely higher than what we see at Bermuda. The last bit I want to introduce is a place that's really very busy and really highly industrially developed, which is the Gulf of Mexico. And what I'm showing you here, these are ship lines, the summer traffic in and out of Gulf of Mexico. This is from a map by University of Delaware group. And you notice, again, there's a lot of traffic going into Galveston, a lot of activity around oil rigs from all of the supply vessels that come in and out of various ports to service and bring personnel aboard. And since the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, there have also been a number of recorders along the shelf edge for the most part, but also some shallower ones in that area. And some of them are found in these areas very close to the shipping lanes. And what Sean Wiggins has found, looking at the noise data from those sites, is that some of those sites are extremely loud because there's just a tremendous amount of traffic coming and going. So I've color-coded the locations on that map on the right to the figure lines here that you can see. And you notice that the GC site, which is basically just south of the Mississippi Delta, which was right on that main shipping channel into and out of Galveston, and as well the red line down at Dry Tortugas, which is again just adjacent and abutting the shipping lanes. The noises levels are there quite high. As you go into shallower waters, which are sites MP and DC, the noise levels are substantially lower. So again, this is similar to what we saw in Southern California, that in shallower waters, the noise levels change quite dramatically. But at MP, you see there is the levels at about, 40 hertz and higher are still quite higher than they are at the DC site. And that is from all of the small boats and small boat activity that goes to service the rigs in that area. I think it will actually be interesting to see how the events of the last week are changing potentially the noise levels here in kind of a small experimental scale. Because with the hurricane sitting over Houston, there's been a lot of decrease in movement and capacity of all the things that are coming in and out of the Gulf. So we have very unfortunate, but I think an interesting natural experiment to see how much those levels are going to decrease. Because one of the other sources of noise here also are air guns, and there's going to be a lot less seismic activity in there currently. So if we put this all together, like I said, the Gulf of Mexico is really, really loud, and it stands well above the levels of Cape Hatteras and Bermuda. If we compare it to noise levels in the Pacific, that offshore side of San Nicolas, the one that was kind of looking into the North Pacific, it seems louder than Cape Hatteras, but not nearly as loud as Gulf of Mexico. And then San Clemente kind of creates this lower bound of really quiet environment. Some of the other locations in the Pacific, again, Pearl and Hermes, that was one of those outer Pacific or outer Hawaiian atolls that is also another quiet environment. But then the Gulf of Alaska and Washington State are these continental slope, fairly loud environments. And so if you put all those together, it kind of looks like this mess. But you can see again that there's kind of different regimes. There's some areas of the ocean that are incredibly loud, a lot of them that are pretty loud, and some that are maybe still actually relatively quiet. But these are all snapshots. So what do we actually know about long-term changes? And for the most part, that's actually really hard to figure out, because it's hard to track some of that original data from the 50s and 60s and get that early data points, because a lot of those locations where the recordings were collected are classified. But I've tried to summarize here, and this is a figure that's been adapted from a paper by Don Ross. On the left-hand side, this is largely data from that paper, and it's showing the noise levels at 50 hertz at a variety of different ocean basins. And then on the right-hand side, I'm showing you the data points from these various figures that I've just pulled out. And when you first look at that, if you look at these specific, they all kind of seem to be in same cloud, and the West Atlantic is all kind of similar cloud. But I think what is really critical here is that to look at it just in this scale is not going to be sufficient. What we need to think about is really where each of those points is and how does that relate to where the other points that are on that map are collected. Because I think there's a lot of variability within each of these basins. And so just to highlight, the circled ones here, these are the noise levels at St. Nick over time. And so you see that from the mid-60s, there was that increase to the early 2000s, and since then we've had this steady decrease. And I think the critical thing will be to create these matches of locations and levels that we know levels historically and where we know them now, and can get a better understanding of how they've changed over time. In addition to that, I think that it's important to also have in mind kind of some end members that are out there, things that are really loud, like Gulf of Mexico, and understanding how that impacts the fauna in there. But then I think a really interesting place is going to be Arctic. And we have noise measurements, I didn't show you that, but we have noise measurements from there from last years as well. And that point there on the right is showing those levels are, this is still a very quiet environment, but there's no doubt that that is going to change. And that is going to be a place where I think we'll be driven to try to understand how those changes are going to impact a very fragile system that's going to change very quickly. So, and I think that's also a good lead into some of the discussions that are coming into the Arctic lately, or next. But so, I don't want to look 100 years into the future. I think that's a tall order. But I think that over the next 10 or 20 years, we certainly have plenty of challenges ahead of us. And the first one is going to be to really try to better understand some of the baselines and understanding the baseline environment that we're dealing with. And access to some of this historic data, it's been fun and challenging to try to get access to it. But without that historic data, one thing that I'm concerned about is this concept that is well understood in ecology of shifting baselines, of seeing the world today and assuming that that's how it's been, without understanding that 50 years ago it may have been a completely different environment, and animals have evolved in that different environment, not even 50, but even longer before that. So I think it's going to be really critical to document that trend over time. And I think opening up of the Arctic is going to be another great and unfortunate experiment where we can see how increases in noise, both from the removal of sea ice, but also from increased human activity, how that is going to impact the life there. The other set of challenges that I think we're facing in the future is that we really need to get a better grip and understanding of how all these different sources of noise are impacting animals. Right now, a lot of the efforts in the marine realm have focused on these behavioral response studies, which are very costly and take a lot of time and effort and end up yielding a relatively small number of data points. I think observational studies can have a power to bring a lot larger data sets and kind of give you some statistical power. But to be able to do that, there's a lot of challenges of working through the acoustics and understanding where your sources are and where both the sources of signals, but then also where your animals of interest are. And some of the fancy propagation modeling that we've seen more recently with increasing computer power and increasing data storage and all these abilities, I think we're coming to the point where we can actually use a lot of these observational data tools to move in that direction. And I think also looking into the future, there are many generations of Walter Munk that I think will come through and are ready to tackle some of these questions. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I'll take questions. So it's a little bit tricky, but that it could be an indication, yes, of the Lombard effect, right, of the cocktail party effect, where as the noise around you is getting louder, that you're just speaking louder as well. It's a little bit more complicated. You'd have to do, again, but this is one of the things that we might be able to try to answer with the increasing ability to actually track and localize animals on a larger scale, and to see how well that matching actually occurs versus it just being that increase in background noise is just basically adding to the contributed higher levels. But I think the interesting one, if I go all the way back, was from the 2014 data, right? There we can see that they're still calling as loudly in 2014 as they were in 2010 when you take that noise away.
Doesn't the one on the right show them calling 10 dB louder?
Yes, but then there's also the question of at which point do you reach your maximum, where if the noise keeps going up, you just can't yell anymore.
I'm wondering whether some of the changes that you see in the shipping are related maybe not so much to the numbers of ships, but to the types of ships changing. And for instance, you showed a picture of a great big car carrier with a whale, and they call in every day in San Diego and then head across to China to pick up more cars on a great circle. but a lot of those larger ships and cruise ships are now have azipod propulsion, and I'm wondering if anybody studied whether the noise signature of those kind of propulsion systems is higher or lower than conventional.
So there has been efforts into decreasing noise coming from vessels in general, and there are studies looking at how different changes to the design of the vessel are affecting the sound field that it puts out. So I think that that's something that, yeah, people are starting to look at.
We'll take one last one from Martha.
Some of those. First, we have calibrated array data from our ice camps in the early 80s and the 90s. Some of it's ready for taking, just reproduction. And it's array data, so you get directionality out of it. Related to that is, have you considered using vector sensors for some of these observations? The cost of deployment and everything else, the additional cost of vector sensors should be trivial, and the Navy has systems like the DIFAR sensor, which would be ready to go. And it would seem to be able to improve your interpretation several-fold because of getting directionality into it.
Yeah, so,
Oh, yeah. The final one is related to Peter's comment. The naval architects in our department have a lot of ongoing dialogue of quieting of ships. There's probably less than 10 major power plants for bulk carriers and oil and material manufacturers in the world. They're quieting them. They're trying to get better propellers so they don't cavitate as much. They usually don't cavitate, but they sometimes do. And better, all in all, quiet ship. And so the shipping industry seems to be responding to this call of getting the noise down.
right, so let me do that in order. Great, I would love to see your data. To,
Some of it's ready to go, some of it needs some transcription.
yeah, to the second question about the vector sensors and DIFARs and other things. A lot of this has been opportunistic. These recorders have been deployed for other things. I have recently learned the wonders and magic of ITAR, and getting DIFAR and vector sensors gets me into that territory even deeper, so that's something to consider, the trade-offs between those. And yeah, that's...
Scripps can't get them. I don't understand that.
You can't move them around.
You can get them, but you can't, yeah, I can't ship them, or it's really hard to ship them other places and then do stuff other that's, right, I can't have foreigners, and I mean, there's all kinds of beautiful things about ITAR, so.
Okay, Dan, we'll do the last one.
Yeah, just to follow up on Bob's comment, when I was a graduate student, it was really unusual to see a blue whale in California current. I was talking to Bruce Mate last night, he's confirmed the same thing. So it's an anecdote, but your peak that's, that Bob pointed out, blue whales may be real, that they just weren't here in the 60s, and that there's been a change in the system, so blue whales are actually quite common now.
I agree, I think for the 60s that's the case, but over the last 10 years or so, or certainly since even the 80s, the data by John Kalamakita shows that there hasn't really been a change in the population here. So I think there was a shift probably at some point, and now we see them and hear them all the time.
Okay. Let's thank Anna. We'll cut it off now, please, and thank Anna again.
Thank you.